Hi, and welcome to the Introduction to Shakespeare, the background PowerPoint slash video. Hopefully you have your notes sheet in front of you. Be prepared that for every section there is a number that corresponds with the slide. So the expectation or the idea is that with every slide you'll fill in the number that corresponds with it. So let's begin. It's important to realize that because of his extreme popularity, Shakespeare really needs no introduction, but it's really essentially important to understand what's going on in the world at the time of his writing, and we saw that a little bit with our poetry unit. So the English Renaissance was taking place during this time. We talked about that as well when we started going over Shakespearean sonnets. The word Renaissance sounds like kind of a stuffy word, but it was a cultural and artistic movement that occurred in England during the 16th and continued on through the early 17th century. The English Renaissance is associated with the European Renaissance, which was a time of great art and culture, which is believed to have its beginnings in Italy. There are a few differences, though, between the English Renaissance and the Italian Renaissance. First, the English Renaissance focused mainly on producing great literature, while the Italian Renaissance was known for its artwork. This includes sculptures and paintings. Also, the English Renaissance saw its height during the 1600s, while the Italian Renaissance occurred a bit earlier, mainly during the 1520s. Finally, the work of the English Renaissance was influenced by the work produced during the Italian Renaissance, which makes sense. However, the works of the Italian Renaissance were made in order to copy or revive the works of the ancients, especially the works during the height of the Roman Empire and works of Greek artists. So it's very, very important for you to understand the differences between the English and Italian Renaissance. It's often referenced as the age of Shakespeare or the Elizabethan era. However, there are a few problems with these names. First, Shakespeare was not as famous for his work during his lifetime as he was after his death. And second, the English Renaissance actually covers a time both before and after the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Some of the most important playwrights of the English Renaissance not only include William Shakespeare, but also his contemporaries Ben Jonson and Christopher Marlowe. It's important for you to understand that although it seems like the English Renaissance focuses solely on the production of work by Shakespeare, Jonson and Marlowe are also very, very important. Other important writings were produced during the English Renaissance, such as works by Edmund Spenser and John Milton, and by English Renaissance philosophers such as Sir Thomas More and Sir Francis Bacon. So, poets, Spenser and Milton, philosophers, Bacon and More. I would suggest that you do a little bit of background research to understand the kind of the philosophies behind Bacon and More's ideas. The actual Elizabethan era, a time period different from the English Renaissance period, is associated with the rule of Queen Elizabeth I between the years of 1558 and 1603. So, inside the Elizabethan era, there is the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, 1558 to 1603. This era was relatively peaceful compared to the periods before and after it. Before the Elizabethan era, England went through its Reformation period, and afterwards the country saw battles between the Protestants and the Catholics, and between Parliament and the monarchy. The Elizabethan era was also known as the golden age of England's history. It was not only a time of the production of great literature and poetry, but also a time of expansion and popularity of the theater. In addition, during the era, England explored and expanded its empire to include other countries, and the Protestant Reformation attacked and provided a defense against the powerful Catholic Church. So, we have this push of poetry and plays and philosophers, but also realize that the history itself is flourishing. Many people are starting to push their limits in regards to their understandings and their quest for knowledge. The Protestant Reformation attacks these such ideas, but the Catholic Church provides a defense against the Protestant Reformation. With the Queen in the public eye, it's no wonder that the Elizabethan era also saw a height or a skyrocket in fashion. Influenced by styles coming from both France and Spain and other European countries, the Elizabethan era provided such fashionable items as the farthingale, which created the hoop skirt. So you can see on the picture on the left how the skirt is very small at the waist and then goes out. There's a farthingale underneath, which is basically a series of like hula hoops that make the dress fall over it. The mandolin, which was a pullover style jacket with open sides, which the gentleman on the right is wearing. Ruffs, which were pieces of material that ruffled around the neck, also the gentleman on the right is wearing. And all of the garments were embellished with all different patterns of embroidery. Because life for the average person during the Elizabethan era was often filled with difficult physical work, annual celebrations and festivals, such as a carnival, were created to break up the monotony of daily life. Celebrations gave people something to look forward to and remained so popular that many are still celebrated today, even in America. For example, Mardi Gras is celebration. The Mardi Gras celebration is based on the Carnival, during which people dressed in masks and had wild parties. However, most celebrations are either based on agricultural ideas or purposes, or the changing of the seasons. Other celebrations from the Elizabethan era that continue today, not only in England but also across America, include Valentine's Day, April Fool's Day, and the 12 days of the Christmas season, which are celebrated from Christmas Eve through the Epiphany Eve, which is January 5th. Now, moving on to the plague. Although the Elizabethan era was a time of great literature and celebration, it was not safe from the plague. The bubonic and the pneumonic plagues had been around for centuries, and they had caused the Black Death of the 14th century when they spread through Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, wiping out almost 50% of the world's population. It's important for you to understand that the plague has reoccurred every generation for centuries following the first medieval outbreak, and in certain areas continues to reoccur. It's important to remember that traders who brought rats with fleas in their crates where they kept the goods from the raids, and the men's fur clothing were what carried the plague into the other countries. So there was this misunderstanding when the plague first developed of how it was transmitted, which heightened the hysteria. A lot of innocent people, a lot of groups of individuals were actually targeted because many people believe that they purposely brought in the plague. The best way to get rid of the plague is to practice good hygiene. And during this time, there was a lack of good hygiene. So those who often did practice good hygiene for religious purposes or because of their status were often targeted as kind of the ones who were maybe pushing the plague or spreading the plague. Medically known as the bubonic and the pneumonic plagues, the bacterial diseases are believed to have been spread by infected fleas on rats. The symptoms of the bubonic plague include a high fever, chills, pain in the muscles, and hemorrhaging that can cause this is kind of gross, but bloody pus-filled swellings, which appear on the skin above the lymph nodes. While those of the pneumonic plague also caused bleeding in the lungs and the rest of the respiratory system, but none of the actual bloody pus-filled swellings. The pneumonic plague bacterium was even more often fatal than the bubonic. The plagues resurfaced in England during 1592 to 1593. They caused all the theatres in London to close for fear of spreading the disease by being in such close proximity to other people. Not really understanding the origin or the transmission of the sickness, like I talked about before, people believed the diseases were spread by bad air or through the breath of infected people. It was during this time that Shakespeare wrote 2 long narrative poems because there was no work for him in the theaters. We have to kind of reflect on these and think about that there are indeed other diseases in modern times that cause incredible change in human behavior. I mean, the most recent would be the Ebola outbreak or the Ebola scare that the media seemed to create this hysteria, and many of our human behaviors, including who can travel when and who's allowed to be in contact with whom for however many days, changed because of this. So think of that very minuscule, small-scale hysteria that developed with the Ebola disease to what it was for the plague in London. We're going to stop at this section, and this will be the end of video 1. So make sure that you go back to any notes that you need, go backwards to other minutes in the presentation or other sections of the slide, and make sure that you have the information for each slide on your outline sheet before moving on to the next section.